It's a great honour to have been asked to speak to you all today about craftsmanship, what it means to me, and why it matters, not just to our industry, but to society as a whole. I didn't realise I'd be accompanied by this frog in my throat, for which I apologise. What is it that I especially like, find magical even, about the handmade, the craftsman-made? I still find this question almost impossible to answer succinctly, despite being asked so often. It's in large part the quality, but of course, quality is only guaranteed from good craftsmen. Is it the friendliness, the visible difference between, say, machine stitching and hand stitching? Is it the object's invisible roots, the sense of a past, an intangible but almost human warmth, the awareness that every craftsman-made object carries with it the story of the craftsman or workshop who made it, and the craftsmen and workshops who made them, and those who made them, and so on, back into the mist of time? Is it the knowledge that we're somehow feeding that tradition, watering those roots? Is it the individuality, the inherent characteristics of the wood, the marble, the leather from which the object is made, the flaws maybe, which aren't really flaws, such as the hairline cracks in a beautiful pot? What was it Leonard Cohen said about cracks? They're how the light gets in. Or perhaps it's the tangible comfort that with quality comes longevity, really well-made pieces that will endure, age beautifully, and be cherished for generations to come. I believe it's all of these things, however imperfectly I may have described them. The fact that when something is genuinely and wholly craftsman-made by a well-known and trusted craftsman or precision engineer, because we should never forget the craftsman engineers, or in a known and trusted workshop, we know that they're properly paid, treated and recognized for their skills and their hard work. They're not Uyghurs held against their will, to take an extreme example. So let's summarize. What is it that I especially like about the true craftsman-made? It's the enduring quality, the individuality, it's the hidden human stories, and it's because I like fair play, and I don't like exploitation, a subject I will return to at the end. How did Soane begin? It began, not that I knew it at the time, which was 27 years ago, in 1997, with a summer-long road trip around the UK, researching craft skills. And with the small number of exceptional craftsmen that I met and whose skill and knowledge have underpinned every design Soane has made since, and without whose guidance, there simply would have been no business. I still don't quite know how we managed it. I was 25 and frankly hugely naive about pretty much everything, but especially the extent to which people would share my enthusiasm for local craftsmanship. But a very wise mentor and a few significant commissions from architects and decorators, mostly in the US, got us out of the starting blocks. Today, we still work with nearly all of these craftsmen on the map, or with those who have taken on their workshops when they retired. Every year, we also forge new partnerships with new makers, many with fascinating stories about how they came to do what they do and the remarkable projects they have worked on. In the last year alone, we've started working with 3 new workshops in Scotland. Every object tells a story, they say, but the stories told by objects that are craftsman made tend to be better, closer to the object itself, more human. One such business, found in our 5th year of trading, was the last rattan workshop in Britain, Angraves in the village of Thurmaston. This was a workshop with an illustrious heritage, having taken on the designs and some craftspeople of a neighbouring workshop, Dryad. In the early 20th century, it supplied all the great English houses and their verandas with rattan furniture, as well as commissions for the first-class areas of the Titanic. It also made furniture for the last Tsar of Russia and for early commercial aeroplanes. And it also took a commission from Lutyens for the British Embassy in Washington. It was Christmas 2010, and I received the phone call telling me that Angraves was going into receivership, the British equivalent of Chapter 11. Its closure would have spelled the death of an English village's 150-year-old craft legacy. But what to do? I had no experience whatsoever of running a manufacturing business, and the idea of doing so felt daunting in the extreme. Yet Soane was its only customer for its handmade work, and here was an opportunity not simply to protect the country's rattan heritage, but also by creating opportunities for the younger generation to learn this traditional skill and to ensure its longevity. In the end, we felt we had no real choice but to intervene. We now employ nearly 40 craftspeople, including Marcus here, our very first apprentice, all the way back then, and a number who have joined us as apprentices since. A word about mass production, because some people think that I'm straightforwardly hostile to mass production. I'm not. I'm no Luddite. Industrialization, the application of power to the manufacturing process in factories rather than small workshops, has brought benefits of every kind. At the same time, I'm conscious that mechanization and production lines, for all their advantages, which include consistent quality, have stripped most of the things we buy of their individuality, even in a sense, their originality, and also reduced the people who make them, or parts of them, to operators, as distinct from craftsmen with creative agency. A few points about craft practices. Firstly, craftsmen have a flexibility a factory doesn't, which allows them to implement new approaches at a speed unachievable in mass production. Secondly, by designing individual bespoke objects, craftsmen can explore alternative working methods in order to create pieces that are perfectly suited to their intended use, user, and space. Thirdly, the independent nature of many craftsmen forces them to adapt their techniques to suit the resources available to them. This allows them to trial experimental, potentially more sustainable approaches and materials with greater ease due to their reduced setup costs. And finally, their skills aside, what's the one thing that all true craftsmen have in common? It's the desire, even the compulsion, to do their work as well as it can possibly be done. I see this and feel it every time I visit a workshop. For medieval craftsmen, making was an act of piety. At some level, that's what it remains for all true craftsmen today. I'm for both mass production and craftsmanship. I'm for both IKEA and Hermes. IKEA with its undeniable quality, accessibility, and transparent supply chains, and Hermes with its rigorous standards, living heritage of true craftsmanship, total integrity, and total authenticity. IKEA wins on value for money in the minds of most, but equally, there's a reason Hermes is one of the world's most respected and resilient luxury goods brands. I thought it would be interesting to illustrate the importance of our maintaining heritage skills through 4 stories of devastating fires and the restoration projects and resurrections that followed them. Built as a Tudor palace in the early 16th century, Hampton Court was redesigned by Christopher Wren in the 17th century, possibly to rival Versailles. This resulted in the destruction of almost half of the Tudor palace, including nearly all of Henry VIII's private apartments. I can hear you wince. The fact that this remodeling is rarely discussed is telling. Like all great houses, Hampton Court's history is always told through its occupants rather than its makers. Let's face it, Anne Boleyn makes a more compelling story than Christopher Wren. The fire was in 1986, on the 31st of March at night. A royal palace for over 500 years, it was decimated in the space of a single evening, the victim of an elderly resident's habit of reading her newspaper in bed by candlelight. Hampton Court was home to innumerable examples of fine craftsmanship. Notable among them were several large wood carvings by Gwynlyn Gibbons, whose work, never surpassed, stands at the pinnacle of traditional wood carving. When faced by the prospect of losing such pieces of these, we're forced to accept how much we have forgotten in terms of traditional craft knowledge. Fortunately, only one of these carvings was completely lost, and a small team of exceptionally talented woodworkers was able to restore the others. This restoration project, like most such projects, was an opportunity to learn from the masters of the past, a process I see as education through restoration. Britain has many great carvers, but sadly, too much of the contemporary carver's work is repetitive and low grade. It is only through trusting craftsmen with an element of creative control that we can encourage these skills to improve upon their historical counterparts. Ultimately, in architectural terms, the fire at Hampton Court proved to be a lucky escape. Due to the nature of the destruction of the building, large portions of its original features could be reused in the restoration. Even the great crystal chandelier, crushed by the collapse of the ceiling it so beautifully lit and illuminated, could be bent back into shape. Tragically, during Hampton Court's restoration, another of England's great stately homes suffered the same catastrophe. On the 30th of August, 1989, it was the turn of Uphook, a late 17th century masterpiece in the Sussex Downs. The house, famed for its particularly delicate interiors, had remained unchanged for some 400 years. The devastation caused to the building was so serious that most doubted the property could be saved. Happily, the National Trust's insurers decided that restoration would be cheaper than a payout for total loss. Our gain. The subsequent restoration of Uphook further highlighted the wealth of craft skills involved in the creation of such a building and the difficulty of replicating such work today. The ground floor rooms housed 5 beautiful 17th century stucco ceilings, all of which had been reduced to fragments. Freehand modelling of lime and hair plaster is a technique that had been lost for 150 years. No plastering firm in Britain had any experience of working in this way. In fact, the recipe for creating the plaster mix had been completely forgotten. The restoration of the Uphook ceilings required the mastery of lost skills in an alien material and on a daunting scale. Geoffrey Preston is a conservator and sculptor with a background in stone carving, who was invited into the restoration project. Having taken it upon himself to conduct the necessary independent research, he rediscovered the techniques of 17th century stucco modelling, but was unable to locate a single living practitioner. He therefore placed an advert in the Artists' newsletter for ceramic artists who would be willing to apply their skills in an alternative manner. And then he held a series of auditions to assess competency, and finally set about teaching successful applicants how to apply stucco while simultaneously running lime plaster cornices. This approach was only viable due to the presence of a surviving craft industry. Although not trained in this field, the ceramicists possessed skills that could transfer between different craft disciplines. They understood material, they had an eye for detail, and they had creative patience. Skills not highly valued in an industrial setting, but essential for craft work. The lengthy Uphook House restoration was a success story that showed that if the required skills exist somewhere, there is hope of restoration, even if the most desolate cases, just so long as there is the will to make it happen. The project highlighted how important it is both to train the next generation of craftsmen and to give craftsmen the opportunity to develop the highest level skills. Assuming, that is, we don't want to lose them forever. The approach taken by the Uppert conservators, one of maximum fidelity to original materials and techniques, is atypical when it comes to this type of work. When Windsor Castle was stricken by fire 3 years later, on the night of 20th November 1992, the restoration was undertaken with a completely different mindset, one of opportunistic compromise. The opportunity was taken to modernize the building and alter its design, better to suit its current use. Steel and concrete were used in place of their oak and stone counterparts, and the ornate plasterwork was completed, this time with cast gypsum. There is, of course, an entirely sound logic to such an approach, but I do occasionally wonder if an opportunity to further the skills rediscovered at Uppert was forsaken. At the same time, their work was inspired, including the recreation of the woven silk wall and bed hangings by Richard Humphreys, who works with Walters, an 11th generation family-owned silk weavers based in Suffolk. By studying fragments of the fabrics destroyed in the fire at Windsor, they were able to accurately reproduce each and every one of the fabrics concerned. My fourth fire is one I'm sure every one of you will remember. On April 15th, 2019, flames engulfed Notre Dame Cathedral, burning for 15 hours, consuming most of the roof and causing the spire to collapse. Having absorbed the full horror of the catastrophe, I suspect most of us in this room were thinking the same thing. Do we really have the skills to recreate this masterpiece? Notre Dame has had over 500 craftspeople working on it in the last 5 years, including Americans and Brits. Their skills are rare, at best scarcely taught, at worst on the verge of extinction. In every restoration project on this scale, some skills have to be relearned. Craftsmen naturally yearn for a challenge, an opportunity to excel, and it's clear that those who've had a hand in bringing this Gothic masterpiece back to life are proud to have done so. One of them is Hank Silver, a carpenter from Massachusetts. In an interview in the New York Times, he put it quite simply like this: nobody builds cathedrals anymore. And here again is a story with a happy ending. After years of expensive, painstaking, and hugely complicated restoration, the finished project will be triumphantly revealed to the world just before Christmas this year. A less happy story is that of the Glasgow School of Art, which, as we're in Scotland, I would be remiss not to mention. Designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh and considered by many to be one of the world's finest Art Nouveau buildings, it has twice in recent years been devastated by fire. The first on the 23rd of May 2014, destroying its magnificent library, and the second on the 25th of June 2018, during its restoration. I hate to tell you that its fate remains uncertain. So what do these incendiary stories tell us? Or of what do they remind us? Firstly, these fires remind us of the extraordinary craftsmanship to be found in the world's greatest buildings. In buildings such as Notre Dame, Windsor Castle, Uppert House, and Hampton Court, practically every detail, interior or exterior, is a bespoke creation, showcasing the skill and intelligence of the craftsmen of the time. Such buildings are not mere walls and ceilings. They are libraries of exquisite workmanship and innovative design, and the embodiment of human skill and ambition. They are vital parts of the historical record. And secondly, these fires remind us not simply how much we could lose if genuine craft skills were allowed to fade away, but also just how easily this can and could happen. For me, these fires stand as a symbol of the speed at which traditional craft skills can be lost, just as beautiful buildings and beautiful works of art can be destroyed in an instant. So the decades of development that have gone into perfecting the skills to which they owe their existence can be erased in a generation if we all do not take the necessary measures to protect them. And thirdly, these fires remind us how much the past can teach us. Charles McKim, in establishing the American School in Rome, sought, in Charles Moore's words, to train artists by bringing them into close contact with the masterpieces of all time. It's the same with craftsmanship. Craftsmen, to be complete, need to know and understand the work of their ancestors. And often it is restoration projects that gives them the opportunity. This is what I mean by education through restoration. To be a true craftsman is not simply to be a supplier, however skilled, however creative, but also a researcher. Sadly, restoration teaches us too quite how much we have completely forgotten, or lost the ability to do, or to do sufficiently well, even having mined different craft disciplines for a solution. And finally, these fires remind us of the importance of ambition. The ambition to learn, the ambition to teach and to train, the ambition to preserve and to bequeath, and the ambition to excel. And they remind us as well that in the world of craftsmanship and restoration, the more you know how to do and the greater your skill, the more ambitious you're likely to be. The less our history lies in darkness, the brighter our future. Which brings me to the practical steps that are being taken to help traditional craftsmanship endure in the modern world. The Cathedral's Workshop Fellowship is an apprenticeship scheme focused on teaching the skills required to conserve our crumbling cathedrals. Skills such as stone carving, carpentry, and glazing, and which enable students to use the techniques they've acquired on actual cathedrals. The Heritage Crafts Association in England, a charity that offers craftsmen bursaries to learn traditional craft skills, many of which are critically endangered. It supports makers in financial hardship and funds research projects intended to rekindle lost skills. Such initiatives matter. Of course they do. However, they depend for their peak relevance on there being opportunities for the graduates to put their skills to practical use in the real world. Viable career paths, in fact, offering wages commensurate with their expertise. And this is where you, yes, all of you, come in. If heritage craft skills are to be preserved, there need to be opportunities for craftsmen to work on new as well as conservation and restoration projects. Richard Humphreys of Sudbury Silk Mills has managed to tailor his business to modern needs. His knowledge of historic textiles is unrivaled. Alongside the conservation and restoration work, they regularly undertake commissions to produce modern interpretations of historic textiles, including much work for Hopetoun House, where we were last night. An example is the mobile fabric developed by Soane in collaboration with the mill. Inspired by a Napoleon III era needlepoint carpet, the mobile weave allowed the weavers to push the boundaries of their traditional techniques, recommissioning an old loom to produce a truly innovative design. And it's thanks to projects such as this and craftsmen such as these that historic craft skills will be passed on to the next generation. Conservation and innovation make a great power couple. One thing that helps take craftsmanship and innovation to the next level is knowing how to collaborate. What do I mean by collaboration? I mean, as you'd expect, human collaboration, teamwork. And I mean the kind of collaboration and cross-fertilization between craft disciplines that we saw in action at Uphook House. But I also mean something else. I mean collaboration between traditional craftsmanship and industrial processes, an openness to the novel solutions in which such collaborations may result. Let me tell you the story of Crystal Palace, built in 1850 in Hyde Park by Joseph Paxton to house the Great Exhibition of 1851. It's one of the best illustrations known to history of the value of such openness, such intellectual curiosity, such cross-fertilization, and of innovation-friendly cultures. A rare example of an ambitious project completed under budget and before time. Imagine that. The Crystal Palace, the largest glass building ever constructed, was built in 5 months for £20 million in today's money. Moreover, it was entirely bespoke, designed for one purpose and one only, and for a specific place. Its large barrel-vaulted section was actually added at the very last minute to preserve a number of full-sized elm trees in the park. Two things made the Crystal Palace possible: Paxton's readiness as a designer to work in close collaboration with his craftsmen, and Paxton's intimate knowledge of British manufacturing and its most recent technical advances. The Crystal Palace's frame is made of cast iron. There had been advances in the production of high-quality cast iron and the rate at which complex forms could be produced, enabling designers such as Paxton to build previously unimaginable structures. As for the ingredient for which the palace was best known and from which it derived its name, its glass, it owed a great deal both to Paxton's experience designing glass houses at Chatsworth House and to recent industrial advances. At Chatsworth, he had developed the ridge and furrow technique, seen here, a method which allowed him to span large distances with minimal structure, maximizing the amount of light he was able to let in for the plants. The advances in glass manufacture were those of the Chance Brothers glass factory in the Midlands, which had recently perfected the process for making cylinder-blown glass, such that it was now possible to make large panes of transparent sheet glass. Paxton designed every part of the structure around the size of glass sheet that could be blown at the time. In 1852, the Crystal Palace was relocated to Sydenham at a cost of 166 million in today's money, over 8 times its cost of construction. But I'm afraid, yes, you've guessed it, it's our 7th. In 1936, it fell victim to fire. Did that tragic fire somehow symbolize the demise of the ethos of at-scale invention which had so characterized 19th century British achievement? You could be forgiven for thinking so. In today's manufacturing climate, there is a tendency to outsource the fabrication of parts to the lowest bidder. In so doing, we shift the focus away from the whole and in the process make innovation much less likely, but not impossible. Craftsmen and industrial partners can and do collaborate, and people such as you, or many of you in this room, experts, believers in traditional craftsmanship, but also in craft innovation, intermediaries able to see the bigger picture, can play a key role in helping them to do so. Which brings me to my conclusion. I told you at the beginning that I believe in true craft because I believe in quality, because I want skills to survive in every country, and I believe it's vital that they should, and for ethical reasons. This talk does have a sting in its tail, but one I believe we should see as a wonderful opportunity for all of us here. And this is the opportunity. What I'd like to do is create a kind of movement, a movement with you, architects, decorators, and makers at its heart. You who are the shapers of space, you who are at the vanguard of interior design commissions. A movement in favor of traditional craftsmanship, local craftsmen, English in England, Chinese in China, and so on, and honest, ethical business practices in our sector. A movement ideally in favor of maker visibility, but failing which, total transparency as to where makers work. A movement that persuades clients not simply of the added value of honest craftsmanship, but also of the need to investigate provenance, to look skeptically at superficial brand mythologies, as Lulu Lytle has so eloquently described them, and deeply at how, where, and most crucially by whom something has been made. And a movement that persuades you and your colleagues of the role you can and should play in informing your clients. If they care, I believe you owe it to them to ensure they understand the sources of every single thing you buy on their behalf. If they don't care, I'd like you to persuade them to care. To quote a well-known arbiter of taste, Miss Piggy, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it may be necessary, from time to time, to give a misinformed beholder a black eye." I believe that such a movement could make a real difference, and that it would be a better, a happier, culturally and aesthetically richer, and, most importantly, a more honest world if we did. We need to ensure that traditional craftsmanship, true craftsmanship, local, ethical craftsmanship, survives into the next generation and the one after that. How many producers that you buy from show you the full picture? How many pay lip service to the principles I have espoused today, but don't actually respect them in practice? Let me put it another way. If something is made almost entirely in China and only assembled or finished in America or Europe, do you or do you not think that you and your clients should be aware? Do you think they are aware? You see, I know that many are not, and we all know that that is wrong, an unethical deception. And I know too that I often find myself listening to professionals, both in interiors and fashion and food, waxing lyrical about products that even a cursory glance should suggest are not everything they claim to be. Some are undeniably very good, but too many are mediocre and potentially harmful, and a fair number truly shoddy and destined for tomorrow's landfill. I know that many companies find it all too easy to promote their European or American creatives and assemblers while effectively making invisible the craftsmen who have essentially made the item. Makers who are typically Asian, upon whom these businesses and massive margins are built, are removed entirely from the story. In doing so, these businesses are erasing the narrative of the true maker and imposing a new false narrative, whilst at the same time shouting from the rooftops about their supposed support for diversity. And I know that too many journalists are seemingly unaware of, or perhaps happy to play along with, this deception. But it does need our support, and I'm hoping that today can be the beginning of a real shift in our community. On which note here to end, because I mentioned him earlier, is a Gwynlyn Gibbons carving from the altar of St. James's, Piccadilly. One of my favourites, the pelican in her piety. Isn't it extraordinary? I've chosen it as my parting image because it's a depiction of the survival of the next generation. That pelican is taking desperate measures to feed her chicks, to ensure their survival. I've chosen it as a reminder of just how good traditional craftsmanship can be and how incredibly important it is we nurture it. Thank you very much.